More than 10,000 people have already fled to shelters. Nearly 400,000 are without power in North Carolina. On Tuesday, Governor Roy Cooper said 16 rivers were at major flood stage, and 3 more rivers could peak in coming days. Massive industrial coal ash landfills and pig and chicken farms have also been engulfed by the floodwaters, and millions of chickens and pigs have drowned. The Associated Press reports at least 45 active farms are located in the floodplain. More than 1.4 million people in North Carolina are now without functioning water systems, and even more have been ordered to boil their water. The areas devastated by Hurricane Florence include some of the poorest areas on the eastern seaboard. In some counties, nearly 1 in 3 people live below the poverty line. For more, we continue to speak with Reverend Dr. William Barber, who's co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign. He's in Raleigh, North Carolina, distinguished visiting professor of public theology at Union Theological Seminary, former president of North Carolina NAACP and Moral Mondays leader. Recently wrote a piece for CNN headlined, "In Hurricane Wind and Waves, the Poor Suffer Most." So describe what's happening on the ground, Dr. Barber, in your state.
The rivers, even in my city, have not crested yet. We don't know what this flood will cause. In Fayetteville, it's over, they're talking about 61 feet, some 15 to 20 feet higher than it was when Hurricane Mitchell came. That gave us a 500-year flood across the state. Many of the people who are flooded, they work hourly jobs. They're not getting paid now. When people, they don't have the resources. When the governor and others said evacuate, they couldn't evacuate because they don't have the money. They don't have the cars. They did not have the ability. Some people may be off work 2 and 3 weeks. They already were in a position before the storm where if they missed 1 day, they might not be able to pay their rent or afford their medicine or feed their families. 48% of people in North Carolina are poor and low income. That's what existed before the hurricane. We have to talk about the political and social storms that exacerbate the natural storms when they do happen. This state has refused federal money that would have helped the poor prior to the storm so that they would have buffers against the storm. If you come inland now and see these rivers that are where mostly the poor live, along these rivers and in these rural communities, they are being devastated. And when you add to that, lastly, Amy, the environmental devastation, the coal ash, the hog farms, the bacteria, the poison that's being put in the water table and put in the river. This is a catastrophe, a tremendous catastrophe, but some of it could have been buffered, could have been made better if our state, particularly and people in Congress, would help the poor in advance of this storm, would make sure everybody has health care and living wages. And we had cleaned up these coal ashes and coal ash ponds, and we stopped using fossil fuel. If those kinds of things would happen in advance of storms, there wouldn't be so much damage. We're in a state where 56% of the children, Amy, 1.3 million, are poor and low wealth. 62% of people of color, 2.3 million, are poor and low wealth. But this is something people also don't know. The majority of the poor people in North Carolina are white. And even in eastern North Carolina, while those counties are the counties with the highest percentages of African Americans, the majority of the people in those counties are white, and the majority of the people who are poor are white. And so it's a race question and a class question. It's a denial question. It's a question that after these storms normally happen, people go back to business as usual. We're going to have to learn how to do this better. People are suffering. People are afraid all over eastern North Carolina.
Just last month, former Vice President Al Gore visited you in North Carolina, and you went on a tour of the coal-impacted communities. Gore speaking here in front of the smokestacks of Duke Energy's Bellows Creek Steam Station, which runs on coal.
On a peak day, this plant over here burns 220 rail cars full of coal. And what is left over when they burn it is this toxic coal ash. Now, if you had all these millions of tons of a toxic substance, and you just dug a raw gash in the ground and dumped it in there, you would be behaving recklessly.
That's right.
That's what they're doing.
That's right.
This is a crime scene.
So that's Vice President Al Gore speaking outside the Duke Energy plant with you, Reverend Barber. Duke Energy, and that was before the storm. Duke Energy now says at least 2,000 cubic yards of coal ash were released amidst Tropical Depression Florence's massive flooding in North Carolina, enough ash to fill something like 180 dump trucks. As we wrap up what this means.
And one of those areas is in Goldsboro. It's in the Neuse River. It's one of the sites that was already leaking that people have been fighting. And they tell us all the time the coal ash is not poison. And we say, well, then why isn't it in the rich communities? Why isn't it in the communities of the politicians? It is poisonous. It is dangerous. It was already leaking. It was already broken. It was already messed up. The storm has exacerbated this, and it did not have to be this way. Duke, the very company that's now having to send people out to help turn on power, is the same company that has negatively impacted poor communities by placing all of these coal ash ponds and coal ash sites in and around poor communities, in and around sources of water. It is a form of hypocrisy. On one hand, to say we want to help you after the storm, but then but before the storm, we engage in policies that continually hurt and harm the poor, the low wealth, and the least of us.